for the inevitable phone call. And they said, I must have this house. And they'd go in, and he'd put in like some real antiques and then fill the rest of it with junk, so it looked like they're selling a furnished home. And about 6 months later, the inevitable second call would be, so I got to get the hell out of this thing. It's horrible, because if you've ever been in an out-of-scale house, you can't live there. And so he'd keep reselling those, and he'd make more. And now, when he discovered that Philip Johnson was doing little follies that were like small versions of the Lincoln Center, at his home in New Canaan, Connecticut, he claimed that Philip Johnson was ripping him off. I mean, he was a really funny guy who gave a bad name to militant ignorance, and he simply found nothing attractive about modern architecture. He would go to every lecture on architecture, by prominent architects, and he'd write down notes, and he'd send these elaborately constructed letters to like the Boston Society of Architects why this guy should be his license should be revoked, and he was going to destroy the profession. That we are involved in, like trying to be connected to these people. And then eventually they said, please don't send any more letters to us, because it interrupts all our work, because people spend all their time laughing at your letters. I remember the first day that I got kicked out of Harvard Graduate School of Design, I thought that I should go see him. And so he was in there composing a letter, and before I got through the threshold, he said, no, you can't work for me. And I said, I don't want to work for you. I just, maybe you can give me some advice or something, and this kind of thing. And he happened to be writing a letter about somebody that I had never known about before. It was on some of his work was pictured on the cover of Progressive Architecture. This is the architect, Frederick John Kiesler. Let's see, 1890 to 1965. He came from Austria. He was the youngest member to enter the Gestalt movement, and he taught at the Bauhaus in the elementarist section for a short while. And in 1925, he came to the United States. He was known. He was known basically as a set designer and worked for Juilliard. And then taught a course in architecture at Columbia on co-realism. That's what he was calling what he was doing. And he became part of the permanent avant-garde of New York. When Marcel Duchamp, who came over in 1912, ran out of cash, he went over to Kiesler's and he started living with him, and stayed there for quite a while. To work with him is like having the keys of the city handed to you, that kind of thing. And I'm sitting there, my eyes are bulging out like Jim Carrey in The Mask. I said, I can't believe this. And so he said he was writing this letter about Kiesler to the Boston Society of Architects, and he said, well, I can give you one piece of advice. Never, under any circumstances, have anything to do with this guy. So I realized that I was dealing with a person who was capable of absolute inverse knowledge. So I'm going to do the exact opposite of what he tells me. The next day, I'm on a train to New York, knocking on Kiesler's door. And he was at 56 7th Avenue, which is down, way down in Lower Manhattan. And I happened to be carrying 2 suitcases, but they were filled with stuff to show him. So he immediately says, well, you can't stay here. And I thought now he was rejecting me because I had written him 17 letters, and trying to entice him to let me be his apprentice. And so I'm walking down the hall, and so you misunderstood me. I said that, no, in other words, I thought because you were bringing suitcases, that you're going to try and live in my apartment. I said, no, I was stuff I was going to show you. So I showed him models and drawings and that kind of stuff, and he said, these things are made with love, you know, which I like, with a kind of a medieval attitude towards working. And then so he said, okay, you can be my apprentice. Right? And then he said, but with a codicil saying, I can't pay you much, so you're going to have to get a survival job. So that's why I went out and started walking around, and I would go to different places, and they'd say, well, can you do renderings? No. Can you do working drawings? No. Can you do this? No. And then they said, well, you can't work here. Finally, I walked in the Emery Roth's office, and I said the same thing. He says, great, we'll put you right in the design group. And I said, wait a minute. I said, what is it? And the reason is that every office has to have a design group. But see, this was the inverse of an office, where the production staff, where they made all the money, and that's the reason why they were there. So the designers, that was simply for show. And so that's why I was in it. But it suddenly became a strange thing, because the next job that came in was the World Trade Center. And, you know, and then we have this meeting, and this board meeting, and Yamasaki comes in, and he's this little tiny guy, and he has this beautiful model and a big pile of papers, and he taps it on the top and says, you know, boys, fill her up. And somebody said, what do you want, high test or regular? You know, it was a way of describing gasoline at that time. And so he becomes livid, leaves, and then never comes back. And so we think we lost the job. And then, but 2 weeks later, they write and call up and say that they want us to have a presentation in 2 weeks. So we suddenly have something to do. And we're literally designing the entire interior of the building. Well, first he has two buildings with a space in between, you know, like this vibrating visual space. I'm looking at the floor area. Each are 1 square acre. And then with 18 elevator banks, three sets of them, the area is starting to be eaten away. The service core eats away, so you've got really an enlarged corridor space around that. And so it's hard to rent to people who would want open, flat space, because this is when office landscaping was starting to come in as an idea. And so I immediately got the idea, if you had bridges across every 5th level, like 17 bridges, there would be places where a larger company could then take advantage of the horizontal spread. And that's when I get fired, because he didn't want anything to disturb the prism purity of those 2 towers. Yamasaki's position, and his ego is up front, is that he thought that if anyone was negative about it, they were trying to stop it from being the tallest building in the world. In 1972, they realized they only had 2 years left to call this the tallest buildings in the world. Because if they had taken the time to do everything they needed to do, to put all the asbestos on the structure, and that way, it would have ended up that you would have had the tallest buildings for maybe 20 minutes, because the Sears Tower in Chicago was going up as fast as it could go to try to get ahead of it. The case is that fast-tracking this thing into existence resulted in its destruction. The whole business of like why the thing stayed up at all, had to do entirely with the X-bracing. And as long as the things were okay in relation to seismic resistance, that's earthquake resistance, the engineers felt that was sufficient, because they kept claiming if a plane hit it, nothing would happen. They were thinking that the plane would bounce off and fall to the ground, off of this material, which is patently absurd. I mean, the plane penetrated it instantly. And as a result, of things like the flaming and all of the of the fuel, the jet fuel, completely melted stuff, and so that those floors started to drop, and the X-bracing gave away so very easily. But my suggestion was to have the bridges connect into the X-bracing within the thing, have the whole thing welded, so that you would have stability for those two. It would allow people to go back and forth, no matter which one was hit or burning. They'd have some place to escape, and as a result, it also would help keep the thing up probably a lot longer, maybe 4 or 5 hours longer before they came down, because it would have added stability.
After getting fired, Laffoley became further interested in creating greater structural stability by bridging and linking different constructions together. His search for knowledge led him to plant grafting and his design for Das Erpflanhaus, or the primordial plant house. Inspired by the poet Goethe's search for the universal leaf organ that could be used to invent new types of plants, Laffoley proposes to use ginkgo biloba to graft deciduous and coniferous vegetation together into a giant treehouse. The world's growing population could plant a few seeds and solve the problem of affordable housing. Mature homes would be self-sustaining. They would regulate heating and cooling processes, turn raw sewage into reusable mulch, and generate energy through photosynthesis. At night, plants genetically engineered with luciferase, an enzyme naturally found in fireflies, would provide light. Eventually, communities of homes would be grafted together, connected by sequoia trees, until the earth became a giant mega-vegetable, a world treehouse. Within the books of sketches for Das Erpflanhaus, Laffoley has included a chart that maps out the nature of a zeitgeist. A zeitgeist, or time spirit, reflects a generation's cultural outlook. In our present-day society, we live in a polluted and overpopulated world. The plant house would be an environmentally sound solution to the growing problem of mass housing. After September 11th, Paul Laffoley started to design a replacement for the Twin Towers. The sketches have much of the same visionary flair that is found in Das Erpflanhaus. Laffoley proposes to construct a building designed in 1908 by the Spanish architect Antonio Gaudí. It is an early skyscraper, originally intended to be built in the exact same location as the World Trade Center.
Well, we have to go back to 1958. Here I am, a freshman at Brown University. Okay, right. And saying, what am I going to study? I just gotten out of prep school where I had a lot of Latin, so I went in the classics department. I wanted to do things in art, and so I got in these courses that were seminar courses for freshmen, and one of them was a course given by Professor William H. Geordie, who people didn't recognize what he was really doing. So he just landed at Brown because he couldn't get tenure any other place, and he was literally trying to document all American architecture from 1900 on up. So the modern part of heroic modernism for the United States. And so he had 800 pages of notes that dealt with every single thing that an American architect would do or thought about or anything. And so in the course, in passing, he just mentioned, because somebody in class asked, well, what about Gaudí? Had he ever anything to do with the United States? He said, yeah, he wanted a hotel to be built on Manhattan. If the gods had been propitious at that time, in 1908, that building would have been there. It would have been a hotel. It would have been let's see, 5 large halls that would have been connected to the 5 major continents in the world, where goods and services would be displayed. There'd be orchestras in each one, to help, to keep the mood going while people were buying and selling. Gaudi actually produced a World Trade Center. Here is a chance to do an authentic piece of posthumous architecture. And the reason why I say this is not copying a building, say like the way the Japanese have a copy of the Eiffel Tower. That's not posthumous architecture. Posthumous architecture is something that's not a pastiche. It is a new building done by a person who's dead. Gaudi's hotel as a complete plan is actually the part that's not complete, because it's presented in a kind of very abstract way, where it comes down to the earth and then it abstractly connects. Okay, this cannot be in a real proposal, and so here is like a building that is vague enough so that people's imagination, when they design it, can work, but at the same time, you have architectural historians that know Gaudi's work, and there are plenty of them, because you just go to Barcelona and you can spend a lifetime studying all the details. I'm talking about people investigating the design process every step of the way, so that the designer has to be challenged in showing that what they are doing is actually what Gaudi would want.
The notion of turning a Gaudi-designed building into the next World Trade Center would not have been possible if Paul Lafley hadn't designed a time machine. It's his masterpiece. It's also his most difficult project to understand. The time machine is housed in a piece of physically alive architecture genetically created in the shape of a Klein bottle. A Klein bottle is a topological structure with no inside or outside. Twisting, turning, or stretching can alter no point on the Klein bottle. It is a protective encasing for the time traveler and his instruments. An orgone motor powers the time machine. Orgonomy is a controversial science founded by Viennese psychologist Wilhelm Reich. Reich believed in a universal energy, measured in orgons, which is responsible for the creative force in nature. The motor taps into this resource. And this is the actual time machine. It's extremely challenging to understand how it actually works. It involves pendulums, gyroscopes, crystals, structured wormholes, and even human consciousness. Despite the vagueness in the description, it's been rumored that if one were actually able to build a time machine, it would work. This device is called the agnostician. It allows the user to engineer his doubt or belief in order to survive the seemingly bizarre worldviews that exist in the deep future or past. This is the pinpoint where the time machine touches the ground. The Klein bottle hovers above the Earth by relying on electromagnets. If the time machine rested entirely on the ground, it could upset the universe. In the middle of Lafley's design is an alchemist who is about to release energy by dividing the metaphorical philosopher's egg with his sword. By understanding the nature of time, Lafley can apply it to posthumous architecture. The original World Trade Center may have stood up longer if Paul's idea was used. Now he can fix the mistake by figuratively going back in time and resurrecting the Gaudi building, another plan yet to be put into action. Gaudi's building's perfect for the site because it was originally intended to go there. Here's what Lafley plans for the interior of this forgotten skyscraper.
So my idea was, first of all, to accept, of course, because you have to, and the defined infrastructure that's there, but then to produce another special platform upon which the Gaudi Hotel would be built. And I was thinking that it would be modeled after the Parc Grill, you know, like the one where there's wavy places where people sit down, and to actually create a Gaudi-esque landscape, you know, like on the top of these very large apartment building in Barcelona. He actually had planned to do a Virgin Mary on the top of this thing, but instead he had this you know, kind of garden of air conditioning units, you know, where you see these Dairy Whip swirls, you know, that are done in tile, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So that I wanted to have that as the place from which the hotel would come out of, so that you could drive under the whole structure, because there would have to be places where tunnels where cars would go through, places where people would line up to go in this and go up either by elevators or curved stairs, and then emerge on this next platform, which would be this kind of garden, and then you could then have the actual hotel. Now, the first level would be a place where you would have